In 1984, when I was 12 years old, my father's parents came to live with us. Because they had Dad late in life, they were pretty old. Dad's mother, Grandma Marie, was born in 1906. Dad's father, who I call Bodie, was born in 1903. So you can do the math. Grandma Marie and Bodie lived in an apartment attached to the main house, so they had a good degree of independence. And where the main house was chaotic and loud and messy and unpredictable, the apartment where my grandparents lived was tight and orderly and quiet and peaceful. And so, as you might imagine, I escaped there with some frequency. My grandfather Bodie would offer me Pepperidge Farm cookies and milk, and we would often discuss current events. He was very interested in how I was doing in school. Born in a one-room tar paper shack on a homestead in North Dakota, Bodie worked his way through high school, college, and 2 law degrees. And if I asked, he would tell me some of his stories. There was the one about how the railroad came and bought the homestead so that his family was able to buy land in Minnesota for a dairy farm. Another story detailed the huge blow-up in the family when Bodie declined the offer of half of that farm in order to pursue his education. There were stories about the different jobs he was able to find so that he could squeak by, keeping a roof over his head and food in his belly, paying his tuition at first the county high school and then the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and then Yale, and then Columbia. So, needless to say, you can probably guess from this story, Bodie was very, very smart and very wise. He taught for about a decade here at the University of Idaho, and then was recruited to serve as dean of the law school at the University of Connecticut. Over the years, he confided, he counseled many young men to follow their hearts rather than bowing to the expectations of their parents. Now, sometimes my grandmother was the one that I would talk with. She gave me tea and toast. Her stories were less inspiring, but I have to confess sometimes they were a little more interesting to me as a preteen. She loved remembering the days before cars were common, when horses were everywhere and you could get an ice cream cone for a penny. She described the days when my dad was little, how she used to bundle him up and put him in a wooden box strapped to a runner sled and then pull him around town. This is when they lived here in Moscow, and I actually have a picture of my dad as an infant strapped in this box on this sled, getting dragged through the streets. It's really fascinating. But my favorite story was when Grandma Marie would talk about me when I was a baby. See, the story in my family was that I was the difficult one. I was a colicky baby and a willful toddler and a disobedient and unruly child. You'd never guess, would you? Grandma Marie was just about the only one who disputed that version of facts. "You were never fussy with me," she said. "Why, when you were a baby, and you weren't feeling well, all I had to do was swaddle you. I'd wrap you up so tight, you couldn't even wiggle a toe, and you'd calm right down." There were other stories, of course, harder and sadder stories that were shared as I got older and better able to understand. Stories of mental illness and suicide, poverty and struggle. There were funny stories about adventures gone awry. There were romantic stories about how my grandparents met and fell in love. Grandma Marie's friends called my grandfather her mysterious Lochinvar. I was so lucky. These days, I think it's getting rarer for kids to have those kinds of opportunities to learn the stories of their grandparents. Our families tend to be more spread out. Society is getting more and more segregated by age. Fact is, church is just about the only place where you can find multi-generational community these days. And even here, if we're honest, sometimes it's hard to engage across those lines. The little kids are out running crazy on the playground, and their parents are watching from the sidelines, and the teenagers are hanging out upstairs in the yellow house because they're too cool for us. And the elders, those who are still willing to put in the effort it takes to get to church anyway, are sitting downstairs at the table trying desperately to hear over the ruckus. It is so loud down there. These folks sitting up here, they truly are treasures, fonts of wisdom and perspective and insight. They should be overwhelmed with requests for visits and flooded with invitations. They ought to feel treasured and valued by this community. I want us to do better. I want to do better myself. Now, I know I don't spend nearly enough time visiting you in your homes. Some of you I've never actually managed to have a one-on-one conversation with. But those of you who I have visited, I want you to know that you've saved my sanity. They usually feed you tea and cookies, kind of like my grandmother, and they share their stories, and my feet go back down to the ground. Oh, I skipped a paragraph. Okay, I skipped a whole page. All right. So, basically what I was going to say is my job is big and complex, and I'm perpetually faced with the reality that there's more to do than time to do it or energy to do it with. I know, as far as y'all are concerned, I only work for an hour on Sunday mornings, right? But in actuality, I get really super busy. And so sometimes I get a little spun out, a little spun up, a little stressed out. I lose my grounding. And that's when the little voice in my heart says, it's time to go visit the elders. And so I do. And I don't do it as often as I should. I should go more often. I think I would be a better minister if I went more often. Because when I get there, my heartbeat slows down, my breath gets deeper, and my feet land on the ground. I'm able to see these crazy times that we're living in now as just a brief moment in the long sweep of history. I'm confronted with powerful evidence that grace and wisdom and goodness abide. These good people made it through the Depression and World War II. They weathered the McCarthy era and Watergate and Vietnam and the AIDS epidemic and so much more, and they are still good and kind and wise and whole. How can we do less now that it's our turn to weather the storms of history? So I'm not the only one who gets to visit these elder treasures. We have a visiting program. Mary Jo Hamilton and Elizabeth Berlinger and Joanne Webb and Janet DeTemple all visit folks who have a hard time getting out and about. And Sue Allard has been a visitor as well. A lot of our elders are uncomfortable being part of a visiting program, though. They don't want to be a bother. Thing is, though, the thing I want you to hear and realize is that when you allow people to visit you, the visitors are the ones who reap all the benefits. This is a gift for you to give us, to let us come and see you on a regular basis. Now, if you take your kids with you, parents out there, you need to teach them to speak loudly and enunciate clearly. You need to prep them to slow down and to adjust to that easier pace that's a little less frantic than modern life. You need to have them ready to listen, but I promise it will be worth it. My friends, we need to strengthen and take advantage of the precious connections between our community and these elders. We are so lucky to have them. May we never take them for granted. So be it, and blessed be. Let's sing together.